We do not understand God's reckoning of time, but we also have been shut out from understanding the feast of the Lord, which the New Testament says are all shadow pictures of good things to come.
The Prophecies and the Feast of the Lord, presented by Michael Rood.
Shalom. This is Michael Rood at the Ophel Gardens Archaeological Park in Jerusalem. According to the prophets of Israel, the Messiah would perform several miracles that would attest to his authority from heaven. One of those miracles required the participation of those that were diseased, deformed, or otherwise physically challenged. Malachi declared that the true Messiah, the Son of Righteousness, would have the power to heal in the wings on the four corners of his garment. In order to access that healing power, those who were diseased had to reach out and touch him, an act that was forbidden by the law itself. For a diseased, unclean person to reach out and deliberately defile a clean person, especially a teacher of the Torah, was to invite themselves to their own stoning party. It is still a tradition among the Jews today that if a student desires to ask a question of a teacher, they reach out and tug on his tzitzit. The teacher is then obligated to answer his question. This tradition is rooted in the messianic prophecy of Malachi, and this miracle of healing in the wings of the Messiah was and still is appropriated by those who are beset by the otherwise incurable disease of sin. Join us in the Lester Sumrall television studios where this multimedia presentation was recorded. This is Bible Prophecy 101. Now, Episode 5 in the 26-part series on the Prophecies and the Feast of the Lord, the Messiah comes with healing in his wings.
As the prophet Malachi spoke, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. Again, the word wings is the word kanaf, which are the tzitzit on the corner of the garment. The rabbis understood that the Son of Righteousness was speaking of the Messiah. And the rabbis taught that just as the sun was created on the fourth day, so the Messiah will come on the fourth day, or in the fourth millennium. And, in fact, it was Tishri 15 of 3999, with less than 18 months left of the fourth millennium. That is the date on which Yeshua of Nazareth was born, in the very millennium which he was expected to arrive. Now, it was at the very end of that millennium, which shows us something very important, that God is not only omniscient, but God is very slow. And he waits right until the end before the deliverer comes and before deliverance comes. And we see that so many times in our own lives. But just as the rabbis had taught that the Son of Righteousness will come on the fourth day, the Messiah will come on the fourth day, and that the Messiah will arise with healing in his tzitzit, in the corner of his garment, we see that the Gospels now give us the picture of when this actually takes place as far as how that particular prophecy was fulfilled. In fact, it was a time in which Jairus, his daughter, was ill. Jairus lived in one of the small villages, and he had called for Yeshua to come and to pray and minister and heal his daughter. Now, outside of that village, a woman was living who was actually once a resident of that town, but now she was living outside of the village because she had an issue of blood for which she could not get healed. Now, according to God's Torah, if a person keeps the commandments of God, as he says, if you keep my commandments, none of the diseases of the Gentiles will come upon you. But if through someone's disobedience, their contamination with dead bodies or whatever reason, they contract one of the diseases of the Gentiles, then they are to live outside of the household of faith until they are cleansed, until they're healed, because God did not want all of his people contaminated. And because of the disobedience of one person, he did not want all of the household of faith disobedient, diseased, sick, and dying. And so God set up laws of quarantine that if you keep these laws of quarantine, then that isolates the disease from the household of faith. Now, this woman who had this issue of blood, it was there for 12 years. It says that she sold everything that she owned. The house, the chariot, everything was gone. and she spent it all on physicians. For 12 years, she had this disease and could not get healed. She had to live outside of town. And her friends and family would every day would bring food out to her. They'd take it outside of town and they would put the basket out by a rock and they would put the food down on that rock, and then she would come out after they left, and then she would get the food and stay away from them. And so for 12 years she's away from her friends, she's away from her family, and she is desperate. She's heartbroken. She's getting to be an old woman now, and she has no hope of ever getting healed. But she has heard, because her friends and her family come out and they talk about this rabbi that has been teaching around the different synagogues in the area, and that he is going to come into town because everyone has heard how ill Jairus' daughter is. And so when this rabbi is coming into town, Yahshua is coming in, then there is a whole group of people following him that had come from the previous town in which he was teaching the synagogue. And as he's coming into town, then the entire city then flocks out to the gates of the city and makes a pathway for him. And all the people are there. There is a throng at the gate of the city, and they are so excited that he's coming, because this they have heard that as he teaches in the synagogue is that people are getting healed, that he's interpreting the Torah, and there's a fame that goes out about him among all the people around. And so these people are so excited about hearing. And this woman knows the prophets. She has studied the scriptures. She has been raised with the prophets in the Torah all of her life. And as she's outside the city, she realizes that if this is the Messiah, this is her chance. Because she knows that when the true Messiah comes, that he will come with healing in his tzitzit, in the corner of his garment. And so, while everyone's attention is diverted, there is a throng, and everyone's attention is on Yahshua as he comes into town. Then she comes from the other side of town in back of everyone. And very quietly she comes in, she covers herself up, and then gets up behind the crowd. And then when she approaches the crowd, she then gets on her hands and knees and she crawls up through that crowd and gets right to the place where Yahshua is going to be walking past, because they've made an opening in the path there. And as he walks by, then she reaches out through the crowd and grabs a hold of the tzitzit right down on his calf, on the corner of his garment, and she grabs a hold of that tzitzit, and as it then, he walks by and it then slips out of her hands, he stops immediately and said, "Who touched me?" And everyone froze, and the disciples said, "Well, like everyone is touching you, Lord, this is a throng. You've seen this before. What's the problem here?" And he said, "No, I felt dunamis. I felt virtue go out of me. I felt power go out of me." And when he turned and he looked, and his eyes engaged her eyes, and everyone saw who he was looking at, right then they scattered like flies immediately, because they realized that she had just contaminated every one of them. That here, this Yahshua was coming into town. He was going to come in and teach. He was coming in to heal. And now she has contaminated them, and they can't be in the presence of other people until after sundown, because now they're unclean and they have to mikvah and they have to separate themselves because they don't want to pass it on among the other people. They are immediately hostile. And he said, "Who touched me?" When they scattered, she knew that if this is not the Messiah, she, this unclean woman, has just deliberately reached out and she has touched the hem of a kosher rabbi. She has deliberately defiled someone, and she can be stoned on the spot. The people know it. She knows it. Yahshua knows it. She's a dead woman.